Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me here. My name is Claudia Listopad. I'm the president of Applied Ecology, and we were very happy to be involved with this testing. We have also worked with the county, so we'll actually be sharing results. I'll actually be sharing results today that look not only at your specific testing, but a little bit also on the county testing, since it was just performed really side by side. If I can get... Okay, so I start with the questions why we did this. This all started, the whole concerns with the PFAS really started becoming known to the public more in 2016. Now we have had this PFAS, and we'll talk a little bit about what those components are, for a long time in our environment. But it was only in 2016 that EPA reduced their lifetime drinking health advisory, which we'll call HAL. You'll see that in the reports all the time. There's lots of acronyms, and now I'll try to show some of those most common ones, for drinking water from 400 to 70 parts per trillion. So when that happened, that reduction in what a good number was, that triggered a lot of testing. And the first testing that EPA requested the Department of Defense to do was all across the country in the military bases. And the main reason the military bases were the first line of testing was because we knew they were using AFFF firefighting foam, which had these PFAS contaminants in it. So this is what triggered a lot of these concerns. In summer 2018 is when these results came out. And what it showed is in the local Air Force Base, the Cape Canaveral Patrick Air Force Base and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, we had very high numbers for PFAS. So those are some of the numbers there in the presentation. Patrick Air Force Base, we had up to 4.3 million parts per trillion, so many orders of a magnitude higher than what was now the drinking water standard. And Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, 53,000 parts per trillion. So obviously this immediately raised a flag. The public was very concerned. So it was unknown if PFAS was moving from the bases to the adjacent communities. So obviously Satellite Beach, Cocoa Beach were some of the communities were first very concerned with this. And this has led, and also to the Indian River Lagoon, because these two bases are right on the banana. So this led to the concern from the county as well, not only the adjacent cities, but county-wide residents to be concerned, wanting county-wide testing. So one thing I want to mention, all these health advisory numbers, the drinking water standards, is for drinking water. And all the areas we're testing in the city of Satellite Beach, the irrigation water is not being used, the groundwater, shallow groundwater is not being used for drinking water in any way. So we are using a very conservative standard to compare against irrigation and groundwater that's not for that consumption. So I want to point that out. So in addition to testing for PFAS, we also looked in the city of Satellite Beach testing at a whole slew of other contaminants, which are called priority pollutants. And this was actually derived from a different concern. This was a concern from the historical dumping prior to the use in South Patrick Shores, the residential development of South Patrick Shores. So very different. So I divided that into what we tested, what did we sample for. So PFAS is a whole slew, over 6,000 different chemicals. We have tests for about 24 of them in our days. And the PFAS and PFAS that everyone is talking about are two of those 24 that we tested for. So we did test for all the Department of Defense methods. And there's a variety of sources for PFAS. You probably heard about it, from food wrappers to some drinking water, plastic bottles used to have, carpet that we still use, different clothing items. So there are very strict standards for collecting this data because of all these other sources we're trying to eliminate when we're testing for this. The priority pollutants we tested for included all the EPA-approved priority pollutants, and we added additional things as a request from the city. We added some herbicides, we added perchlorate and radionuclides, which are in addition to the typical EPA priority pollutants. So where we sampled, there were 3 shallow groundwater monitoring wells that city had previously installed specifically for monitoring PFAS. So we resampled those locations. I'll show you what those are at. One of City Hall right here, Jackson Avenue Sea Park. There was one surface water irrigation well, so Satellite Beach Sports Park is actually fed by the surface water, so it actually takes water from it and uses for irrigation. It's not really groundwater, so I wanted to point that out. And we also tested the irrigation water coming from it, but the source is really a surface water body. And then we had 4 other irrigation wells, and we suspect all those were deep irrigation wells. And that's the other important point that the public should know, is that the majority of the irrigation wells on the beach side are really deep wells, not shallow. There are a few shallow, typically pretty old wells, but those are very saline and they're not very good for irrigation, and that's why we typically have irrigation wells that are, 75 to 125 feet. A shallow irrigation well would be typically less than 25 feet. So it gives you an idea. And that's very important for the results, and you'll see that. In addition, we also tested the beach access shower, and that is actually fed by a shallow groundwater well at Grant Avenue. So this is a map, a little hard to see from this far away, but the blue dots in here are the groundwater, the monitoring groundwater wells that were installed previously for the PFAS, and the green is all the other irrigation wells we monitored. So that's just the details of sampling locations, so everyone can see what those are at. If the well depth is really important to interpret the result, if it's shallow or deep, makes a huge difference. So, in comparison to your results, I wanted to put a little bit of where the county sampled as well. So, in yellow is the city of Satellite Beach sampling. See if I can point that out, right here. And all around the county, we also sampled. We sampled 49 other samples for the countywide study at the same time, including other groundwater wells nearby, some control wells in Melbourne Beach, control wells all over the mainland from Titusville, one control well in Titusville, but other wells, residential wells in Titusville, Suntree Riviera, Turkey Creek. So we had quite a diversity. We wanted to see, are the numbers of PFAS we are looking, that we're finding on the beach side, are they similar everywhere else? Or are we seeing a higher number here because we're close to a Patrick Air Force Base or Cape Canaveral Air Force Station? We also sampled, there were concerns with the dredging. So we sampled the Grand Canal, not only the water in the Grand Canal, but also sediment, muck in this case, when we looked at those numbers. And we decided, well, we should also sample the lagoon water, because we were all talking about the concerns of lagoons. So we had samples in the lagoon, just a few samples in the banana. And also, so that's what the blue points that are spread in the middle of the lagoon, with the banana in the north and one in the central. So, results for PFAS. I've separated this out from PFAS and priority pollutants because they're very different. For your results, this is the zoomed in, you can't see all these numbers, but the important part is that we had detectable concentrations only at the 3 monitoring wells and 1 of the irrigation wells. All these wells where we had even detectable levels, which means they were just barely above laboratory detection limit, were shallow. So it was your groundwater wells just as we suspected. None of your deep wells had anything. So irrigation wells that come from deep sources really are not getting affected by the PFAS. You have a confining layer, so that was actually anticipated. None of the levels we monitored were above the 70 parts per trillion. So if that explains it, they were all below that. I believe the highest number was around, of PFOA plus PFAS together, was around 40 parts per trillion. All the other numbers were below. And obviously none of these are used for drinking water. Comparing those with, there's also irrigation, provisional irrigation levels, screening levels that have not been approved yet. There are several orders of magnitude higher, so you're way, way below those. So I didn't even bother comparing for your purposes. Oh, that is going the wrong way. Okay, so these are some of the values you can't really read, but none of these. If a cell is highlighted in blue, would be above some kind of regulatory level. You can see there's really no cells with numbers highlighted in blue here. They're all just above detection levels. And these are side-by-side comparisons, your results with the county results. The Brevard County had different results from yours. While you didn't have any of your numbers above the 70 parts per trillion, the county did have a few numbers. And I'm not going to go into detail because we had a lot of samples, but the summary of it is we had one groundwater monitoring well with numbers as high, just below 500 parts per trillion, and it was in mainland, Palm Bay. So that was unexpected. We had two irrigation, one was with push point, there's similar shallow wells with also above that, about 100 parts per trillion around there. And then we also had 3 of the surface water samples we did in Lagoon above the level. So that was also unexpected in my view. And so that shows you some of the hits. It just shows the groundwater. We had a lot of wells, and we had, both PFOA and PFAS way above the screening levels for this particular well in Palm Bay. And these are the Brevard County irrigation wells that also had, it was 100 parts per trillion here. This was in the South Patrick Shores area. So the 2 Brevard County wide study irrigation wells had that had above the 70. One was in South Patrick, and the other one was Cocoa Beach, Snug Harbor area. So if that helps the finding it. So summarizing the priority pollutant results. So here we tested for a whole slew of them. I'm not going to go for the list and just pointing at what we looked at. One thing I want to point out, Brevard County also did priority pollutant testing, and they only did this in the South Patrick Shores area. So right here. So really your priority pollutant testing was done very close in proximity. They focused really on the area of concern. South Patrick Shores is the area of the historical dump site, so they wanted to pick that location. So we did it as close as possible with different, it's difficult to get exactly people to allow you to test in the area sometimes. But we did have shallow groundwater, shallow irrigation wells from South Patrick Shores. We tested 3 for priority pollutants, and that was a county. In your case, we tested your groundwater shallow monitoring wells for the priority pollutants. And the reason we wanted to do the shallow is that where typically we see most likelihood of seeing these pollutants come in, seep through, would be in your shallow. All your irrigation wells were pretty much deep wells, so we didn't want to spend a lot of money testing. These are very expensive lists of chemicals to test. So they fit in categories. So semi-volatile results, we have about almost 100 of them. None of them was detectable in your results. So we saw none of these chemicals. The county results, we had 1 hit, triachloroethylene at 1 site. That was the only thing we had. It was below groundwater cleanup standards, so it was a low number, but we did identify it. This was in the South Patrick Shores, so not your data.
Where in South Patrick?
We don't have...
The general area?
Yeah, we can only give you the general area, so we can't really... Oh, you can't see exactly where... so the whole neighborhood, we pretty much had tested that around in that neighborhood, the South Patrick Shores. It goes from Ocean, I believe, to... So we don't have the exact person pinpointed out for protection.
Did you provide those individuals with the report, so did they have them available?
The individuals don't know, they're blind. So they only know 3 people were tested, you are one of these 3. So that's the only way we can protect people's, but yes. So only one had, this value though was way below the groundwater cleanup target level. So we wouldn't trigger like a site-specific investigation or anything like that. It's way below what would trigger a cleanup, basically.
Okay.
It was just a detection. We detected something. Pesticides and herbicides, nothing detected. The only thing detected, nothing detected for the city of Satellite Beach. For the county, the only thing that was detected was dieldrin. It was detected at 1 site above groundwater cleanup target levels. We explained that in the county report. That is pretty typical. That's used to be used for termite treatment all the time. Beachside was commonly used, so we are actually surprised not to have seen more of it, actually. Perchlorate and PCBs, nothing detected. That's a good thing. Also, we didn't do perchlorate for the county. They weren't concerned with it. No PCBs were detected in any of the county samples. Cyanide, we had some detectable concentrations way below any groundwater or target health levels for your city. They were just barely, below the practical quantitation limit. So basically, the laboratory can't even tell you exactly how accurate they are, but there's something there. So nothing really that raised much flags. We did find several metals that we expected to. 6 of the 13 metals we tested for were found. A lot of them in one particular site, SB1, and they're all, below any kind of cleanup standards. So again, nothing that raised huge concerns. No cyanide detected for the county-wide results, and again, we detected metals for the county studies. There was only one metal, actually was strontium. The county tested for strontium, the non-radioactive part too, the metal, and there was strontium detected in the county studies just above the groundwater target levels, but that's really typical in Florida too, as part of the geology. So again, that wasn't that unusual. Radiochemistry, so that's, radionuclides, what would scare a lot of people to hear. So everything, there were detectable concentrations of 3 radionuclides in 3 of the wells in the county. All of them were below any groundwater cleanup levels. They were just barely above detection levels. And strontium-90, we actually didn't detect any at all in your samples. Similar results for the radiochemistry, actually countywide. The numbers were very similar. Nothing for strontium-90, and some alpha and beta numbers way below the groundwater. So conclusions, you basically had no concentration, city of Satellite Beach had no concentration of PFAS, PFOA plus PFAS, above lifetime drinking water health advisory, so which is much stricter than any of the proposed irrigation screening levels. The drinking water, again, a reminder, the drinking water in the city is not from your groundwater. It comes from the city of Melbourne, which has multiple sources, none of them groundwater from adjacent to any of the bases. The detectable PFAS were only found, if we had detects at all, were found in shallow groundwater wells, which is not typically how most residents are using their irrigation. They have deep irrigation wells. And pretty much all the priority pollutants, herbicides, pesticides, everything we tested was in a slew of 200 plus chemicals that were tested in your free groundwater wells were either non-detects or way below the groundwater target levels for cleanup. So overall, there was nothing that really raised huge flags of concern, and hopefully that makes residents less concerned about immediate any contamination they might have near their homes.